Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a quick look, a plunge really, into cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
Right. Often called the gold standard in psychological treatment.
Exactly. And our mission is to pull out the core mechanics, the stuff you can actually understand and maybe even use.
Okay, so CBT. At its heart, it's structured, it's collaborative, you work with the therapist, and it's very focused on the present.
Focused on the now.
Yeah. And the fundamental idea, if you boil it down, is that your thoughts, your emotions, and your behaviors aren't separate things, they're linked.
Like a cycle.
Exactly, a self-reinforcing cycle.
Mm.
What you think affects how you feel, which affects what you do, and round it goes.
And here's the bit I find fascinating, the kind of philosophical shift it offers.
Mm-hmm.
It's that your reaction, your feelings, your behavior, it's driven less by the actual event and more by how you perceive that event, your interpretation.
That is the absolute core. Yes. So say you get a short email from your boss. The distress you might feel isn't inherent in the email.
Right.
It's coming from the meaning you've assigned to it. Like, oh no, they're angry, or I've done something wrong.
And CBT gives you the tools to look at that meaning.
Precisely. It shifts you from feeling like a victim of circumstances to someone who can actively shape their internal experience, by working with your interpretations.
Okay, let's make that concrete. The sources often mention the cognitive triangle. How does that work?
It's a great visual, really. Think of a triangle. One point is a thought, maybe a negative one, like, I'm a failure.
Okay.
That thought directly sparks an emotion at another point, perhaps hopelessness or sadness.
Which then leads to...
A behavior at the third point, like avoiding tasks or withdrawing. See the cycle. Thought enough feeling behavior.
Got it. And understanding that map shows you where you can intervene.
Exactly. And you don't always need a therapist sitting there to start. There's a practical tool, sometimes called the 3 C's.
For self-application.
Yeah, for everyday use. First C is catch. Notice the negative thought when it pops up. Often the feeling is your first clue. That sudden dip in mood. Ask yourself, what was I just thinking?
Okay, catch it.
Then you check it. Is this thought actually accurate? Is it helpful? What assumptions am I making here? You sort of put it on trial.
Interrogate the thought.
Right. And finally, you change it. Actively reframe it into something more balanced, more realistic. Not necessarily positive thinking, but realistic thinking.
That makes sense. But you mentioned earlier the deeper stuff beyond these immediate thoughts.
Yes, the hierarchy of cognition. So these thoughts we just talked about catching, Aaron Beck called them automatic thoughts. They just pop in.
Okay, surface level.
Right. But underneath those, you have deeper, more rigid beliefs. These are called schemas.
Schemas, like core beliefs about yourself or the world.
Exactly. Things like, I'm unlovable, or I must be perfect, or the world is dangerous, often formed way back.
And these are harder to shift.
Much harder. The 3 C's work well on automatic thoughts, but lasting change often means identifying and modifying these underlying, deeply ingrained schemas. That's the deeper work in therapy.
Okay, but hang on. If the real goal is changing these deep schemas, how does that work with CBT being known as, well, relatively short-term, often 6 to 20 sessions?
That's a great point, and it leads to why it's called the gold standard.
Yeah.
It earned that reputation because it was actually the first talking therapy rigorously tested, like medication.
With randomized controlled trials?
Exactly. The same standards as pharmacotherapy. And the evidence is strong. It shows high effectiveness for depression, anxiety, even things like chronic pain, often within that shorter time frame.
So it can be effective quickly, even if deeper work takes longer. How?
Well, one key technique, especially for something like depression, is behavioral activation.
Action before motivation. I've heard this.
That's the one. It seems counterintuitive, right? If you're depressed, you don't feel like doing anything.
No energy, no motivation.
Right. But behavioral activation encourages you to schedule and engage in activities, even small ones, that offer a sense of mastery or pleasure before you feel motivated.
So you do the thing first, and the feeling follows.
Essentially, yes, you're creating evidence. New data points that contradict the schema of, say, I'm useless or nothing matters. Action first, motivation might catch up. It breaks the cycle behaviorally.
Okay, that makes sense practically. But let's touch on the nuance, the criticisms we should mention.
Absolutely. It's important. CBT's focus on the present and its time-limited nature can be seen as drawbacks by some.
How so?
Well, sometimes distress isn't just a cognitive distortion. It might be a perfectly understandable reaction to, say, past trauma or ongoing systemic issues like poverty or discrimination.
So trying to just reframe the thought might feel invalidating.
Exactly. If the thought is actually a logical reflection of a genuinely difficult or harmful reality, telling someone to just change their thinking can feel like you're dismissing their experience. The therapist has to distinguish distortion from, well, reality.
That's a critical point. So wrapping this up, what's the main takeaway for you, the listener?
I'd say CBT offers a really practical, evidence-backed toolkit. It gives you ways to understand and change your relationship with your thoughts and feelings, moving towards a more balanced perspective.
Shifting your internal philosophy almost.
In a way, yes. From being run by automatic negative thoughts or rigid rules to something more flexible and realistic.
But it's not the only answer, right? You mentioned limitations.
Correct. And the field knows this. That's why there's a lot of exciting work integrating CBT with newer approaches, the so-called third wave therapies.
Like ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy.
Precisely. ACT, for example, brings in concepts like mindfulness, acceptance, and focusing on values-driven actions. It's less about constantly fighting thoughts.
Which leads us to maybe a provocative thought to leave you with. If traditional CBT often emphasizes challenging and changing difficult thoughts, what if sometimes the most helpful path isn't to challenge, but to simply accept? To notice a difficult feeling or thought, acknowledge it without judgment, and let it be.
That's the edge the field is exploring now.
Yeah.
When to change and when to accept. It adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it?
It really does. Something to think about.